This is Dr. Ben Weitz with the Rational Wellness Podcast, bringing you the cutting-edge information on health and nutrition from the latest scientific research and by interviewing the top experts in the field. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes and YouTube, and sign up for my free ebook on my website by going to drweitz.com. Let's get started on your road to better health. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. Please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a ratings and write a review. That would really help us. More people will find us when they do a search for alternative health podcasts. Also, if you'd like to see the video version, go to my YouTube page. And if you go to my drweitz.com website, you can find detailed show notes and a complete transcript. Our topic for today is the truth about methylation with Dr. Jess Armine. Methylation refers to a chemical process involving the attachment of a methyl group. I know that sounds very scientific, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogen atoms joined together to our DNA. And this has received quite a lot of attention over the past several years, especially in the functional medicine world. DNA methylation is essential for normal development and for many functions in the body, including DNA production, liver detoxification, controlling inflammation, histamine metabolism, estrogen metabolism, immune function, energy production, mood balancing, among others. Methylation deficits have been associated with many disease states, including various autoimmune diseases, autism, cardiovascular disease, depression, inflammatory bowel disorder, insomnia, fertility problems, among others. On the other hand, overmethylation can also cause a number of health problems, including increased risk of breast cancer, etc. It has now become common practice in the functional medicine community. That's Dr. Armine. He's flying in from the East Coast. It's now become common practice in the functional medicine community to assess methylation status by measuring a few genetic polymorphisms, including the SNPs for MTHFR and COMT, and some practitioners will also measure homocysteine levels. There's a tendency for those of us who think about methylation to concentrate solely on the gene aspect, but today we'll discuss the significance of methylation, what it is, what it isn't, how you can help the methylation process, and what pitfalls to be aware of. Our interview today with Dr. Jess Armine. He is a doctor of chiropractic, a registered nurse, and he's been a healthcare professional for over 37 years. He's trained in chiropractic, methylation, genetic research, neuroendoimmunology, say that 3 times fast, functional medicine, applied kinesiology, and cranial manipulation. And he's one of the few specialists in the United States who's an expert at correlating the genetic SNPs with the neuroendoimmunology. He also correlates this with acquired mitochondrial dysfunction and cell wall integrity, if you have any idea what that means, to identify hidden imbalances and hidden stressors in the body. And then he develops individualized treatment plans for patients. Dr. Armine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate it. Very good introduction.
So I tell you what, what the hell is methylation, and why should we care about it?
Well, I'll tell you, methylation is a term that's been bandied about very, very significantly for the past couple of decades now. And methylation is an important process in all points of DNA replication and in the actual turning on and turning off different genetic pathways.
Okay, so let me just stop you real quick there. So what you're saying is we all have these genes. We're born with the genes. Essentially, they don't change. However, some genes get expressed and some genes don't get expressed. You could also refer to this as the gene is turned on or the gene is turned off. And I think
correct.
what you're saying is that when genes get methylated, they either get turned off or turned on. Is that correct?
Essentially, that's correct, because if you really want to learn about methylation, honestly, you can go to YouTube and look for the simple, like there's a couple of methylation raps, and some people do like about a 2 or 3 minute video, and it gives you a general idea of what's happening. And one of my favorite sayings lately is that we can understand the body right down to the quantum level, but we can only intervene globally. So the understanding of methylation should be as follows. Number one, we're not talking about the genome, we're talking about the epigenome. You'll hear the word epigenetics, and that means that set of genes that creates or encodes the enzymes that run our bodily processes. They are static, as is our genome, but the environment and other factors can interfere, can alter those enzymatic pathways without getting super technical, because super technical doesn't help us. Okay, what helps us is understanding that methylating proteins, putting a methyl group on different proteins, in certain areas will turn things off, in certain areas will turn things on. Let's think of it as balancing and regulating physiology, because that's what it does. And the reason that we should look at it like that is to decrease the amount of angst and fear that I constantly hear from people. As you said, I'm an epigenetic expert. I'm one of the recognized in the world. I take that as a sacred trust. So when I get a call from somebody who says, I just found out I have MTHFR compound heterozygous, and they're like, you can hear them sweating over the phone. And my first question is,
by the way, compound heterozygous?
I'll explain in a second. Okay. I'll simply say to them, look, were you sick yesterday? No, I feel fine. Then you're not sick today. MTHFR, that was my segue into MTHFR. Okay. MTHFR is one of the quintessential genes that represents the methylation pathway. MTHFR, the big word is methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. Okay. And I always tell my patients, when I say something fast, ignore it, okay, because I'm going to explain it. Okay, what MTHFR does really is take the result of what we do with folates, okay, and turn it into the active 5-methylfolate, okay, which contributes to the creation of SAMe. And SAMe is what takes your methyl donors and puts them all around into different places. So the creation of SAMe becomes a primary thing to do. But we think of the active methylfolate as being the thing that helps DNA repair. And it would be correct. Does the mechanism really make a difference? Not unless you're a practitioner and you have to intervene, okay? In which case, then you should know the basics, because you want to know how to intervene to the patient's best benefit, okay? So MTHFR, when they first studied it, they studied 2 variants. You have to understand something about genes. It's not just a gene. Okay, you have a gene with a whole ton of variants. For instance, MTHFR has got 50, count them, 50 variants. Generally speaking, the C6717, the 1298C are the ones that were studied at first. And when they talk about heterozygous and homozygous in a gene, we're talking about the estimate of its innate ability to function. So when you look at a genetic report, you see green next to something, okay, which is usually negative. It means that the enzyme that gene creates is going to work the way it's supposed to, given nothing else going on. If it's yellow or heterozygous, which is a plus minus, okay, means that it's working about 60% of the way it should, given nothing else. And if it's red or homozygous, working about 20% of what it should be doing, given nothing else going on. So when somebody has compound heterozygous, they are plus minus or heterozygous for the 1298C and the C677.
So let me just stop you real quick. So I often hear practitioners say, well, you're heterozygous for that, so it's really no significance.
That's true. The here's the
And the reports usually say that too.
True.
You only have one copy, so it doesn't mean anything. But you're saying you can still have a 40% reduction of your ability to create that enzyme or for that process in the body to happen. So that could still be significant.
It can be. So let me answer that question.
I mean, if I told you you had a 40% reduced heart function, you'd want to know about that.
Well, yes, you would. But let me frame it in the way that the way that it's working. First of all, remember that you're born like this. So
right.
if you're as a baby functioning well, means that it doesn't matter where the polymorphisms are. Now, remember,
there's probably different genes that
there are. But here's the reality of the situation. Let's take the folate pathway,
okay,
which starts from FOLR1. Don't worry about these letters. FOLR1, FOLR2, DHFR, and MTHFD1, until you get MTHFS, until you get to MTHFR. Don't worry about all that big stuff. Okay, that pathway requires those genes, those enzymes. Most of them require NAD to work, B3. Okay, for MTHFR to work, it needs at least B2 and B3 to work. So, for instance, if you don't have enough B3 in your cells and B2, okay, those enzymes are going to slow down significantly. And if there's already a 40% reduction, wow. Now, there are factors that will slow down the enzymatic reactions. For instance, in the folate pathway, dairy antibodies, methotrexate, folic acid, large amounts of green tea, grapefruit seed extract are some of the things that will slow those enzymatic reactions down. Now, I want you to think of the yellow or heterozygous as being...
Now, you said folic acid, so you're talking about something different than what is often recommended by a doctor like you, which would be a form of folate versus folic acid, which is a synthetic form. Which is
there's significant problems with the synthetic form, and thanks for bringing it up because it's true. It's been used many years, but there are problems with the way that it's conjugated. It doesn't create the end product, which is 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate. That MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, turns into 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate or 5-methylfolate. So. But here's the thing that I want people to understand, that let's say that yellow is a 4-lane highway, that red's a 2-lane highway, and green's an 8-lane highway, okay? If I have a bunch of yellows and everything's running the way it should be, okay, because nothing wrong with me, but then I start blocking those areas by putting all those factors in that slow it down, okay, like the dairy antibodies and so forth, and then I don't give my body enough B2 and B3, that's like taking a 4-lane highway and putting a construction crew in there so that maybe 1 or 2 lanes are going by. That's when you start getting symptoms. It's the polymorphisms or the SNPs will give you an indicator of what a pathway may not work so well under an oxidative stress load or when other things are going on that would slow it down. Innately, by itself, it means nothing. Right. But it gives you heads up. Now, if you've got a compound heterozygous, you start looking around on the internet. This is where I get the panicked calls. You have to realize
this is where you have. When you have a genetic variant, you can have one copy, which is a heterozygous. So let's say the normal is AA, and then you might have an AG, which is one copy of a variant gene, or a homozygous, whereas you have a GG instead of an AA, so you have 2 copies. So you're saying if you have one copy of one gene and then you have one copy of another gene involved in the same process, that's what you're calling a compound heterozygous.
Yeah, there's that's a fairly commonly used term for heterozygous of the gene variants that are usually studied, the 1298C and the C677C. So you go to LabCorp, you go to Quest, and they test MTHFR. Those are the 2 variants they're testing. Okay. They're not testing the other 48 variants. Okay. And it's hard to get a study where you can see a lot of those variants. Nevertheless, the thing that everybody needs to know, practitioner and layperson, is that when you go to those websites that say MTHFR or SNPs of MTHFR cause this, and they'll say cause blood clots, cause infertility, cause stillbirths, and then if you've got compound heterozygous, oh my God, you should jump off a bridge because this is a list of symptoms that list of things you're going to get. Those are incorrect, and I'm going to tell you why. When MTHFR was first studied, it was studied in relation to homocysteine. So they thought that if they looked at the SNPs of MTHFR, we could predict high homocysteine or homocystinemia. And that would be a predictor of cardiac disease. That didn't work out so well. Okay, so anybody who had anything wrong with them started testing for these genes. And the erroneous conclusion, because a lot of people have polymorphism, a lot of people have SNPs, they just do. Okay, it's just the way our genome is.
Yeah, it's like
epigenome, right?
60% of the population has at least a heterozygous SNP for MTHFR. But homocysteine is still a recognized risk factor for heart disease.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was the relationship between MTHFR and homocysteine. So everybody started testing for it, and anybody who had anything wrong with them. So the erroneous conclusion was that they came up with these lists of things that MTHFR would cause. A gene doesn't cause anything. Okay, so everybody got scared and said, look, if I have this problem, I'm going to concentrate on this. Well, it's wrong. You have to concentrate on the bigger picture. So yeah, it does have a relationship to homocysteine. High homocysteine is one of the ways you can test if you have problems with MTHFR and high homocysteine. Now you know it's expressing. Now you know what to do.
So any gene is just going to increase or decrease your tendency for something to possibly happen.
Exactly. Okay. And that is more based. This is where we came up with foundational treatment, and otherwise known as
it's your environment, your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise, all those things that will determine whether or not that genetic tendency gets expressed and you actually have some issue in your body.
Hence, when you go to look at your MTHFR status, and your practitioner does some testing to make sure that you're not in any kind of danger, okay? The beginning fix is to do exactly that, changing your lifestyle, drinking better water, breathing better air, managing stress. There's a lot of talking about earthing these days, grounding and so forth. I live on beautiful Cape Cod, except for the sharks. Okay, so I do a lot of walking on the beach. I don't do a lot of swimming. Okay, I don't, they're passing by. I know they're only waving at me, but I'm not. In the water, let's face it, I look like a seal. I don't look like a seal to those guys.
Come in the water.
No, I'm like this. Unless you're a land shark, I'm staying here.
A little nibble won't hurt you.
Yeah, on my phone, we have this thing called Sharkativity. So every time they see a shark, kid you not, it goes off, and you see it's plotted where all the sharks are. They closed the beaches. Well, now it's September. The sharks are still around, and there's a lot of them around. Okay, I'm not going in the water, and they're everywhere. I see some of them, they're getting a little tired, so they're like on the highways going like this with the thumbs out. If they had thumbs, they're like, I'm like, get back in the water. No. That's like
we need some better food. These fish are all loaded with plastic. We can't eat them anymore.
Yeah, well, the reason they're here is because we have the National Seashore, and it's got thousands of seals, thousands. Right. And the seals protect themselves by swimming close to shore. So you see the great whites. We have videos of them 10 feet off the shore, 15 feet off the shore. That's not even waist deep, guys. I'm not arguing with a great white shark. Okay, I went whale watching. Okay, there were whales all over the place. We saw dolphins, and then a great white came by saying, "How you doing?" Okay, we're just waiting for one of those whales to bite, because they found there was this big whale that was dead, and they were just all feeding off. They were having a good time. Yeah, they're not really aggressive, but you don't want to look like a seal.
Right.
He looks like a seal.
So let's get back to methylation.
Yeah.
So
well, the sharks methylate too. I mean, really,
Of course.
Hey, we all need to methylate. They're like, you know about methylation? Like, whoa. Okay, guys, just
that's how you get over methylated.
It's right. You want to know about? Oh, you see my other background. It says the new thing. Keep calm, swim fast. I'm sorry. I'm
or use the buddy system. If you see a shark, give him your buddy.
Just remember, it's like seeing a bear. I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you. That's right. It's true. The same thing with the shark. I'm just going to lay there. You're going to be flapping around. It's going to go after you, not me. I'll be like this in water.
So if these genes that code for methylation tendencies.
Yes.
So if we measure some of these genes, do we also want to measure serum levels of these substances that result from the expression of methylation, like you mentioned, homocysteine, and so there's some labs like Doctors Data that have a methylation panel and measure methionine and SAMe and some of these others. Is that what we want to do? Because that tells us whether the genes are getting expressed?
Exactly. And I'll tell you why. Because to worry about, first of all, if you have a genetic test, whether you get your data from 23andMe or from Ancestry.com. By the way, I wouldn't suggest 23andMe anymore. Okay, Ancestry.com.
You don't? How come? What's wrong with 23andMe?
23andMe has changed their. When you do a test, it's run through a computer, and there's a chip that reads the genes.
Okay.
And it used to be the V2 chip, and it read 500,000 genes.
Right.
And then they came out with the V4, which 250,000. Now they changed their chip 23andMe to read only the genes that they were utilizing for their purposes only. Now, the reason 23andMe got so big was because people like myself were able to take the raw data and put it into different programs so that we could pull out what we wanted. Okay,
that's what we do in the office as well.
Yeah, but they've changed it. So what I've recommended to my patients, for whatever it's worth, is to use Ancestry.com's their cheapest offering, okay?
Right.
And they still use the V4 chip. So wherever I put that data, I'm getting more data.
What about the outside labs that do genetic testing? I know Diagnostic Solutions has, I think they just recently released a new genetic panel.
They have. I haven't had the chance. I haven't, I read what everybody sends me, okay? But I haven't, you and I have been in practice a long time, okay? I've been in practice actually more than 43 years now, okay? So we've seen a few things come down the pike, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Chromium picolinate, then all of a sudden it's just chromium. I remember when GHB was a weightlifting drug, and now it's a date rape drug. I wait, okay? So when I see no, seriously, come on, how many things have you seen come down the pike? CoQ10, the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? No, it only helped a few people here, but in Japan, it was helping a lot of people because their diet was defunct.
Right. Well, DHEA was going to be the almighty. That was exactly was going to reverse everything.
Right. So, and that's the way it always comes down. Okay. So when something new comes out, I read it, I wait, and usually some patients will, bring the test to me. I'll read it, and after I read several of them, if I see that what I'm looking at correlates with their symptoms, then I'm going to start believing the validity of the test. It's just too early with that one.
Okay, so you don't have a favorite panel right now?
The two panels I tend to use are Strategene, which a new version is supposed to be coming out this month, which is going to be more robust, and I use MTHFR support.com, although that's gotten top heavy lately because there's too much information in there. And unless you're a practitioner, it's hard to pull out what's important. Although, if you wanted to see every pathway like nobody's business,
is that analysis software or that's testing?
That's analysis software. The testing, you would use either the Ancestry or the 23andMe.
Well, those are the only two panels you use. You haven't used any of the other panels.
I haven't used any of the other panels. I've read them. Okay, I haven't recommended them, but people come to me with all different panels from all different places, and I can read them. That's not a problem. But when I'm looking at, somebody says, what do I do with this data? I give them the options of one of the two, and it works. It works because what you have to do is correlate what you're reading with their particular symptom complex. And with a good history, you're going to figure out why. So you have your genetic tests in front of you, and then you have a suspicion based on their symptom complex of what might not be working. And if you want to confirm that, things like the methylation panel, if you're really strong on the methylation issue, okay, the methylation panel is great. Things like the organic acid test are great. There's another test.
So what can you get out of an organic acids panel? What will that confirm for you?
Well, the organic acid panel is measuring organic acids, which are the result of the pathways.
Right.
Okay, so in the typical organic acid test from, let's say, Great Plains, you're going to see indicators of mold, of candida, of SIBO, of Clostridia. You're going to see the oxalate status, which is really important because it's high oxalates is one of the major reasons for illness. Okay, as secondary to candida, but you'll see it there. Okay, you'll see the function of the entire Krebs cycle, how you create your energy. You'll see the neurotransmitter metabolites. You'll see the functioning of glutathione and many other things. And you'll see the levels of the various B vitamins and some minerals. So you can have a really good idea of what's going on physiologically because you're not measuring serum levels. You're measuring the organic acid that is a result of the intracellular functions. So what they're dumping out of the cell is what you're measuring. So you can extrapolate
it's gone
the cellular
through
function.
metabolism, it's being processed, and that's what's the body's getting rid of.
Right. So you can really extrapolate easily if you just think of it like that.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's got a couple of glitches, but that's, once you know how to read it, it's not a big deal.
So organic acids panel, any other tests you like to use?
I use I don't use the methylation panel too often.
Okay.
Because, I treat methylation on a more basic level.
Do you measure homocysteine levels?
I do. Okay. I will use, it depends on the individual. I'll have, if they're in the States, they usually have insurance that will cover LabCorp requests, and I have, I can write them a script for that, and I can get those like vitamin D25, 125, yada, yada, yada. I can get those tests that way. There's
you ever do a full nutritional status panel like the SpectraCell micronutrient test or the Genova NutriVal test?
I have found, concerning NutriVal and the GPL oat, when I weigh the both of them, I lean towards the GPL oat. The SpectraCell micronutrient analysis is really wonderful because you can see the status of what's going on inside the cell, and you're looking at a 6-month status. You know how a hemoglobin A1C measures your sugar for the past 3 months?
Supposedly, yeah.
Well, roughly. Okay, it's never an exactitude, but you can see, generally speaking, what's been going on.
Right.
Okay, because of the glycosylation of the proteins. But since the SpectraCell test measures what's going on inside the white blood cells, and they generally last around 6 months, you can get a bigger view. So instead of seeing what happened over the past couple of days, you're seeing what's happening over the past couple of months. Plus, they measure and they test the function of the immune system and the function of the antioxidants. Okay, so that's really valuable. And there's another type of testing, functional diagnostic testing, and on the States it's called ODX, which is a massive panel that you can do that covers. It's a blood test and covers. Oh my God, so many different areas. Okay.
Well, when you do the if you do the SpectraCell micronutrient test, if you throw in the cardiometabolic panel, you'll get blood sugar, lipids, hemoglobin A1C. It'll include homocysteine as well, and
cool.
Pretty reasonably priced. So when you order a micronutrient test, you can throw that one in.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know.
And it also includes omega-3s.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I measure omega-3s through something called Omega Quant, but if there's a single test, I like tests that are
included in that cardiometabolic panel, the 6:3 ratio and all that.
Yeah, because that's how you tell what's going on. You also need the AA-EPA ratio.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about cell wall integrity. What does that mean? Okay. you have to remember that the cell wall is not just a wall, okay? The cell membrane is what determines what goes out of the cell, what's being allowed into the cell, okay? And it's being called recently, but it's gaining speed. It's being called the master of the cell more than the nucleus.
Huh.
So when you have chronic inflammation, you have a lot of problems. People talk about leaky cells, okay? What that means is a lack of cell wall integrity or cell wall function, which can come from a lack of phospholipids or a whole lot of other things. And when that happens, your cells aren't going to work.
Because the cell wall essentially is a phospholipid membrane.
It's a phospholipid bilayer, exactly.
Right.
Okay. And I wrote a book with Elizabeth Lambert called Leaky Gut, Leaky Cells, Leaky Brain, which went through it really, really well. It's a simple book. It's an ebook. And I made a very, very large point very easily, because when I write,
send me an email with the link so I can put it in the show notes, please.
Oh, absolutely. I will. Absolutely. And it's we spent 2 years on it, and I think it's kind of a masterpiece because it's so easy to understand. But
Right.
Nevertheless, when we talk about cell wall integrity as being part of considering how to look at somebody's condition, you consider the epigenetics, you consider the relationship between neurology, endocrinology, and immunology, which is known as the NEI supersystem. You consider the function of the mitochondria, and what many people don't do is look at the function of the cell wall, and that particular omega test is one of the ways you look at it.
Okay, cool.
So when you're talking about methylation, okay, what the idea of methylation is to create SAMe, okay, which goes around putting the methyl groups where it belongs. When everything is properly methylated, physiology works the way it was intended. It gets a little crazy about how, the DNA wrapped around histones and, it gets a little nuts. But and it's true, it gets nuts. But the reality is, if you get methylation to work correctly, okay, it's going to be a big contributor to you recreating and maintaining your homeostasis. Now, how the hell do you do that? How the heck do you do that? A lot of people concentrate solely on giving methylated vitamins, methylfolate, methyl B12, dimethylglycine, trimethylglycine, or SAMe itself. That's okay. Okay, there are plenty of products
for example,
out there.
what if somebody was out there, either a patient or a practitioner, was thinking, you know what, instead of doing all this testing, why don't I do the following? I'll avoid any foods or supplements with folic acid, and I'll just take methyl B vitamins. And aren't I covered?
Usually, yes. Okay. Now, here's the thing that people should know. First of all, my particular practice is made up of people who've been here, there, and everywhere and that aren't getting success out of their treatments. So obviously I have a very focused population. Okay, so there are a certain percentage of people that respond very negatively to the methyl vitamins. Like, so let's just talk methylfolate for a second.
Okay.
There's loads of reasons for it.
So we have methylfolate, which is B9. We have methyl B12, which is methylcobalamin. And then we also have the I don't think they're methyl forms, right, of B2 and B6. They're activated forms.
They're activated. They're B2 would be, B6 would be P5P.
Right.
B2 would be riboflavin 5-phosphate. Yeah, and like you said, there are loads of product out there that will put together, and they usually will make a big advertising point about it, and they usually put all the active/methylated vitamins together. This is my advice to everyone who takes this kind of stuff. One, do an experiment with yourself. Do yourself a favor, especially if you've had some really nasty chronic illness for a long time, especially if it's associated with any kind of anxiety or what I like to call neural excitation. Okay, only because the reaction to the methyls are going to upregulate that, which is very uncomfortable. Either take the product you're going to use or use one methylated product like methylfolate, which you can get like anywhere. Start with a quarter of a dose or a half dose, and over a period of 2 weeks, work your way up to a full dose. Here are the 4 reactions you're going to see. 1, if you start taking it and you feel bad, do me a favor, stop. Okay, I can't tell you. The people say I can only take a little crumb of methyl B12. I said, why are you doing? Why are you take? I need the methyl group. No, you don't. If you're not taking a therapeutic dose, what's the sense? Okay,
I
you're not
would
getting
like
it.
to give a caveat since, I've been doing the functional medicine stuff like you for a long time. And a lot of times when people feel really crappy and for whatever it is they ate or whatever they ate or what they took, they automatically assume that means I can never eat that food again.
Yeah.
And so, probably try it, a few times in a row before you decide for sure the fact that you're feeling crappy right now has directly to do with that.
Yeah, it's a tough one sometimes to figure out where it is. But often the second scenario is where people get confused, because the reality is some people will start taking the methyl, I'm just going to say the methyl vitamins, methyl vitamins, and they feel okay, they don't feel whatever. And then within about 2 weeks, they start feeling bad. And it's very hard to realize that they've blocked up other pathways, if you want to look at it like that, and they need to stop the methyl vitamins. Okay, that's the second scenario. And if you have an ear for it, you'll say, okay, just simply stop what you're doing and see in a few days if you don't feel better, because if that is, then you know what caused it. 3,
now, a lot of multis now have the methyl B vitamins.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Methylation, you really need to understand, is big business. Okay, this is why before when we first
everybody's
started,
doing it because we don't want to give people unmetabolized folic acid. So
that's true. But when we first started, everybody's like, methylation, big deal. Soon as the companies grabbed onto the fact that methylation was important, everybody was testing for everything, and they're throwing methyl groups in, and it became hard to find a vitamin that didn't have it. Okay. So in the third scenario,
are you saying the average person should take a multivitamin that doesn't have methyl forms?
No. What I'm saying is that when you take your vitamins,
okay,
be cognizant of the fact of whether they have the methyl Bs in there, and if you start taking that vitamin and you feel bad, it's most probably that, and simply stop taking it.
Okay.
If you start taking the vitamins and within 2 weeks you feel bad, then stop. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
If you start taking the vitamins and it's like you start feeling better and better and better, you hit the nail on the head. And if you start taking the vitamins and you don't feel better, you don't feel worse, it means your body's accepting it, but it's not the answer to your symptom complex.
Now, is the amount in a multivitamin typically enough to create negative reactions in more than a small number of people?
Yeah, it is. And a lot of times the amount of folate is limited because of the FDA restrictions. Okay, you'll usually see B12 at reasonable amounts. You'll always know that you're getting a bad form of B12 when it says that you're being given 1,667% of the percent daily value. Usually means you're getting cyanocobalamin, which is very poorly absorbed. These days, that doesn't exist. But if you do have a problem with the methyl Bs, there's a ton of vitamins out there that have things like folinic acid, or natural folate, and they have hydroxycobalamin and or adenosylcobalamin, and people usually don't negatively react to those.
Interesting.
The reason I'm making the point is because if you do have a reaction to it, it's usually in the excitation, anxiety, or if it's a child, increase in hyperactivity, and you're looking at it and the mindset is, I need this for his methylation, yet I'm going to just work my way through it. And remember that if you give somebody substrate and you give them what they need to metabolize it, they'll create the methylfolate. Maybe a little slower than the next person, but they'll create it. There's usually loads of reasons why you're not creating it, and that includes lack of B2, lack of B3, lack of substrate, lack of folate, like the person doesn't eat green vegetables at all. Those are the reasons that you don't produce it. Now, you can give somebody the problem, give somebody the vitamin, but you also remember you have to find, what we have to do is find out how they got there in the first place, because they can take vitamins for the rest of their lives, but that's not fixing anybody. Okay. We all need a good multivitamin, multimineral. We're talking the bigger picture of having to actually fix things and reestablish normal homeostasis, which starts at that basic stuff that you were talking about before, good food, good water, good, stress relief.
Well, let's say you have a patient that has elevated homocysteine levels and you want to reduce their risk of heart disease, and you give them a methyl B formula, a homocysteine oriented product, something designed to help lower homocysteine levels, and they don't feel well on it. What other choices do you have?
Well, remember, the presumption is their high homocysteine is causing symptoms. Okay, so
no. Let's say they're not having it. Let's say they're not having symptoms, but they want to reduce their risk of having a heart attack.
Okay,
and their homocysteine is 15.
Okay, if their homocysteine doesn't come down, okay, then you definitely want to do the methylation panels. You definitely want to do the organic acid testing. You want to find out where in the pathways that this is being backed up, if you will, and it could be down the transsulfuration pathway. Okay, it could be blocked up by CBS going backwards. There's loads of reasons, but this is where a good history and reasonable testing comes in. I agree with you. You know, most doctors that I know.
What is CBS going backwards mean?
It just means that if CBS is, I said that.
If NBC goes backwards, is that the same thing?
CBS. Homocysteine goes down the transsulfuration pathway past something called cystathione beta synthase to become cystathione, and then cysteine to eventually become to become glutathione, and then glutathione, when it gets used up and gets oxidized, gets recycled. So that whole big long pathway can get blocked up, if you will. And if you think about it like a highway, it's going to block up, you know, and where it's going to block may be one of the reasons for higher homocysteine. Nevertheless, what happens is if your homocysteine is not coming down, it's telling you you've got chronic inflammation somewhere, and your practitioner needs to start investigating that. And when you investigate that, you're going to find out the reason. It's like looking at TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. A lot of times I'll see that up. I'll see poorer thyroid function, but the thyroid antibodies are not there. That's generalized chronic inflammation. I better start looking for reasons for that whole person to have inflammation. And that's, usually under chronic inflammatory response syndrome that may be biotoxins.
And from a functional medicine perspective, typically we start looking for possibilities like mold, heavy metals, other toxins, food sensitivities, leaky gut and other gut problems, etc.
Exactly.
Right?
This is
nutritional deficiencies.
This is why functional medicine and allopathic medicine should actually work in concert with one another, because the allopaths are really, really good at finding out the gross pathologies. You don't want to miss those. Okay, you don't want to miss those. But once they don't find a gross pathology, the typical joke, all your tests are negative, you're fine. Nope. Okay, if you're still hurting, the functional medicine doctor simply goes back, looks at it from a wider point of view, takes care of the basis of the body, the cell wall function, the absorption of nutrients, the absorption of vitamins and minerals, all that stuff, and then starts looking at it from the point of view of what could possibly be contributing to this. Okay, and the functional medicine doc never sits there and says that can't happen. What they say is, well, it's happening. Why may it be happening?
Right.
Okay, and that's how we start. That's why we find things that other types of practitioners don't, so we know what to do. If the normal stuff doesn't work, that's where we shine.
Right.
Okay?
So I just want to pull out, you mentioned, I think is a really good clinical pearl. If you have a patient and they're taking a modern multivitamin, say from a practitioner, some of these professional brands, pretty much the majority of them have switched over to methyl B vitamins, and they're not feeling well, or they're feeling anxious, some of the symptoms that might happen from being over methylated, then you should try to find a multivitamin that, instead of having methylcobalamin, has hydroxycobalamin, because you don't want to take cyanocobalamin, because that's small levels of cyanide, right? And then you want something called nature folate as opposed to 5-methylfolate, and they won't typically have the same reaction.
True.
Okay, good. So
the way you would know that is simply by stopping the vitamin that you're taking.
Right. So what else can happen with overmethylation? What are some of the other dangers? Isn't there a danger of increased risk of cancer?
In the long term, okay, overmethylation as well as undermethylation. Remember, too much and too little in the body is just as bad. So it's easier to understand if something is too low. If you have DNA hypomethylation, if you will, there's no sense in even using the terms. When you have too little methylation, it makes sense that things won't work. If you have too much methylation, often if you have an acute overmethylation, you're going to be, and by the way, if that should happen because you've taken too many methylated vitamins, you get regular niacin, the cheap stuff, nicotinic acid, the one that causes the flush. And you take about 25 milligrams an hour, and within a few hours that will calm down because it chews up the methyl groups. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
It's the first aid for overmethylation. The other thing is you have to realize that if you are taking B3 and you're taking a large amount, you may be causing the undermethylation. You might be causing the hypomethylation because you're chewing up the groups. Okay, but nevertheless, hypermethylation, overmethylation, just like hypomethylation, can cause different things. And if it sometimes it's contributing to breast cancer or any of the estrogen-loving cancers, I really would advise people to look for normal methylation function rather than concentrating horribly on over or under methylation, just trying to normalize it.
How do we know if we're overmethylating, other than let's say they don't have symptoms?
It's really tough because some people have related it to the histamine levels and so forth. I haven't seen a good correlation with that. If you're not having symptoms and you're not feeling well, and you are feeling well, and for the most part, you're not overmethylating or undermethylating. If you have a high homocysteine and you add methyl groups, remember, if you really have problems with the methylation system, you're going to have multi-system symptoms. Okay? That's why methylation is important to treat or at least consider. It's not going to be a thing because the DNA production, protein production, is going to be off, which is what's going to cause problems with histamine metabolism, neurotransmitters, detoxification. You're not going to have one problem. Okay? If you just have a high homocysteine, usually it's the simple things that will fix it. Yes, you can use the methylated vitamins, but remember, think about why it got there. Okay? If you really are undermethylated, if your methylation is not working, you're usually going to be sick. Okay, you're usually going to have like chronic fatigue. You're going to have a whole mess of different things going on. And the effect of the root cause, the effect of what caused that, caused problems in the methylation system. So yeah, you want to treat it. Okay, you want to get that person's homeostasis as stable as you can, but you want to look for the root causes also. Otherwise, it's just going to come back.
Good. Okay, so you've provided us with
very confusing.
We could go on for hours, but
yes, we could.
I do have a patient coming up, and
I know.
We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the connection between great white sharks and methylation, and we've talked about the problem.
It's an important point. Let's face it, it's an important point.
I think
especially to the shark. No.
This is probably the only podcast that has covered the connection between MTHFR and great white sharks.
And also, if you think about it, it could be shark defense also. You get the methylated vitamins, they're coming at you, you throw them this way, they're like, ah, and they go after it, like, all right, thanks. That's what I was looking for. I'm like, I know. I'm out of here.
I got methylated before Dr. Armine jumped in. I'm wife's damn. So we've talked about some of the ways to test our genes and to look at some of the methylation pathways and some of the things to look at, and then some of the dangers of overmethylation. So how can our listeners, patients, and practitioners get a hold of you and find out about some of your programs?
Well, you can go to my website, which is drjessarmine.com. You can contact office at Dr. Jess Armine. I'll call that number. Okay, and I'll be happy. I offer a 15-minute get acquainted session, so you can schedule that and we can have a chat to see if I can, help your particular condition. Practitioners, I also run mentoring groups. I do personal mentoring, but I do group mentoring, which seems to work out very, very well. And I run those on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And they are 12-week courses where we get together every week as practitioners, go over tough cases, and then take the learning points from those cases and talk about those subjects. So we find out what the group's issues are, what they want to learn about, and I guide them through that. So I usually can take a practitioner who is not as familiar with functional medicine, and within 12 weeks have them really, really very functional within it, without taking over amount of formalized courses.
When is your next group starting? And maybe you could send me a link for that I could put in the show notes.
I'm going to England starting Sunday until October 3rd. So probably the middle of October. Okay, but I'll send you a link for it because yes, I appreciate that, because I'd like to get most of my groups are in England. And I would like to have some American groups because I know there's a necessity here, especially for the younger practitioners who are watching, who have got all this knowledge and simply can't put the puzzle pieces together, which is what I do, okay? And if you want to be the master healer and you want to learn how to put the puzzle pieces together, I'd be very happy to be your guide. Plus, it's cost effective because, what I charge for person-to-person type stuff borders on the silly. Group is much better.
Right. Sounds good, Doc. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Take care.